My name is Derrick Broze. For the last decade, I've worked as an investigative journalist, hosting a radio show, writing books, and producing numerous documentaries about the realities of child trafficking, the dangers of technology, and indigenous struggles. Now, I aim to uncover whether there exists a network of individuals and institutions which ties these issues together. Many researchers posit the existence of an international cartel which covertly manipulates world events for their own benefit. Are these claims simply fantasy and paranoid delusion, or is there truly an agenda to subvert humanity to the demands of the pyramid of power?
Chapter 13: The Technocratic State. Up to this point, we have focused our attention on the various individuals and institutions which make up the pyramid of power. As we near the top of the pyramid and edge closer to the looming question, who is on top of the pyramid, we must first stop to examine the philosophy which appears to be guiding the actions of the inner circle. Over the years, researchers of the ruling class have typically fallen into one of three categories: those who believe the guiding philosophy is communism, those who believe it is a fascist ideology driving the psychopaths at the top, and finally, those who see the most danger coming from nationalist authoritarians. Now, it's not hard to see why some would believe the threat is communism, fascism, or even nationalism. History shows us the violence, betrayal, tyranny, murder, and starvation wrought by the Russian Bolshevik Revolution and other communist revolutions inspired by the Bolsheviks. Also, we have seen the violence and death brought by Hitler's Nazis and Mussolini's fascists. And history has also shown us that tyrants will use the cover of traditionalism and national identity to enforce their police state measures, as with the Franco dictatorship in Spain. These historical events are all worthy of further inspection, and we will do so in an upcoming chapter. But for now, it's important to understand that while some researchers fall into this dichotomy of communism versus fascism, there are also those who believe this narrow focus misses the mark when it comes to the actual guiding philosophy of the pyramid of power. If it's not right-wing nationalism or left-wing communism we should fear, what is the actual philosophy that underpins the actions of the ruling class? Understanding historical technocracy. In the early 20th century, a movement began to develop around a political theory known as technocracy, a system wherein management of governments is handled by technical experts, often involving technology-focused solutions. Early proponents of technocracy claimed that the concept would lead to better management of resources and the protection of the planet. However, this system of governance by technological experts and their technology would also involve a loss of privacy, as well as centralization of power and the management of all human behavior. In the early 1930s, as the United States population grappled with the Great Depression, many researchers and philosophers began to look for alternative ways of viewing society. Technocracy was one of those alternatives. The book, Technocracy and the American Dream, describes the beginning of the movement as follows. One of the first plausible alternatives was offered by a group of technicians and social engineers who had organized the Committee on Technocracy at Columbia University. Central to their analysis was the paradox of a society victimized by abundance. Science, engineering, and technology possessed the potential for realizing a material utopia, but, according to the technocrats, America's inefficiency in adjusting to the requirements of modern technology had brought about the Depression. Technology, they argued, required the complete reorientation of production and distribution along scientific and engineering lines. Researcher Patrick Wood is one of the first to take note of the importance of the historic technocracy movement. Wood had partnered with Anthony C. Sutton, the famous British-American economist, professor, and writer. Sutton himself produced numerous books explaining the intersection of powerful people and secret societies. In the late 1970s, Woods and Sutton co-authored 2 volumes of Trilaterals over Washington, focusing on the then new organization, the Trilateral Commission. It was Patrick Wood's studies of the Trilateral Commission which led to his understanding of historical technocracy.
This is a system that was created back in 1930 at Columbia University, the seat of progressivism in America at the time. in the heat of the Great Depression, and a group of engineers and scientists at Columbia decided they could do better and that they would recreate an economic system that would replace capitalism and free market economics. They called it technocracy. It was to be a resource-based system, not a price-based system, where all assets, all resources of the world be controlled by them, the technocrats. It was an interesting movement in that they had no use for politics or political structures whatsoever. At the time, they wanted to have President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do away with the political system, declare himself dictator, and just simply appoint technocrats to run the whole country. And they wanted him to dismiss Congress and all of Congress home. And I mean, it was pretty crazy back in those days.
The most influential proponent of the original technocracy movement was a man named Howard Scott, a writer who founded the Technical Alliance in New York City in 1919. Scott believed that business owners lacked the necessary skills and data to reform their industries, and thus control should be handed over to engineers. In 1913, Scott and fellow technocrat Walter Rautenstrauch formed the Committee on Technocracy at Columbia University. The group would eventually splinter, with Scott leading Technocracy Incorporated and fellow technocrat Harold Loeb in charge of the Continental Committee on Technocracy. Both Rautenstrauch and Loeb split with Scott, in part because he was militant about his technocratic beliefs, where the other two men could be seen as more moderate technocrats. Scott began to focus his attention on designing the blueprint for how such a technocratic vision could come to life. Between 1933 and 1936, the first outline of the Technocratic Society came into view in the writings of Scott and in the official Technocracy study course, edited and largely written by another technocrat by the name of King Hubbert. Hubbert and Scott assumed the preferred societal framework is a hierarchical organization. However, instead of businessmen, capitalists, or politicians, they believed it would be the engineers and technologists who operated a, quote, permanent, productive, and distributive system which will harness the energy resources of the country for the mutual benefit of the entire population. This self-perpetuating corporate structure, or technate as Scott called his organization, would be divided into functional divisions run by a divisional director. All of these directors would make up the Continental Control Board, would make, quote, whatever decisions pertaining to the whole social mechanism that have to be made. The Control Board would elect one of its members, Continental Director. This technician king would have the responsibility for the smooth functioning of the overall operation. In 1938, Technocracy Incorporated released a publication that further outlined its vision for a technocracy. Quote, technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population of this continent. For the first time in human history, it will be done as a scientific, technical, and engineering problem. There will be no place for politics or politicians, finance or financiers, rackets or racketeers. Technocracy states that the price and abundance are incompatible. The greater the abundance, the smaller the price. In real abundance, there can be no price at all. Only by abandoning the interfering price control and substituting a scientific method of production and distribution can an abundance be achieved. Technocracy will distribute by means of a certificate of distribution available to every citizen from birth to death. The technate will encompass the entire American continent from Panama to the North Pole because the natural resources and the natural boundary of this area make it an independent, self-sustaining geographical unit. The book, Technocracy and the American Dream, provides some fantastic insights into the mind of Scott and the technocratic vision he proposed. One thing that is clear is that the technocrats were materialists at heart, finding little use for philosophy or virtue. Scott and his allies saw humans as mechanistic cogs in a larger machine that simply needed to be bent to the will of the machine in the interest of some alleged collective good. Author William Aiken noted that in the technocrats' technological utopia, machines serve man only when man serves them. Aiken also claimed that the technocrats, quote, would not accept any limitations on the technician's mandate, preferring instead that the, quote, rationality of science and the harmony of the machine, not utopian virtues, would dictate organizational forms. Scott believed that eventually man would come to accept a, quote, reality understood in terms of machine-like function. The reality of the technocratic vision described by Scott is that it would involve a loss of individual choice and liberty. Aiken writes that, quote, under a technocracy, a sizable amount of things deemed good would be given up. For those who desired a new society, the concern for the Commonwealth minimized outdated concepts of individual self-realization, responsibility for oneself, individual conscience, free choice, and self-expression. The whole liberal belief in the dignity and the worth of the individual. There would be no nonsense about individual liberty. He further notes that, quote, certain individual freedoms would be sacrificed to efficiency, and that an individual's job would not be their own choice, but would be, quote, determined by his abilities and the needs of the organization. The technate would decide how goods were produced, where to allocate labor and resources, develop and apply technology, and most of all, assure efficiency. Of course, consumers might have fewer options in the technocrats' marketplace because Scott imagined the technate would restrict many types of goods which involved waste and inefficiency. Aiken writes, quote, for example, since it would increase inefficiency to produce multiple models of automobiles or specially designed housing, these items would have to conform to functional specifications rather than consumer taste.
If you are driving a non-official car, let's give it a new coat of technocracy gray.
Aiken also wrote that the technocrats attempted to combine their faith in positivistic science with a mechanistic view of man and the dominance of technology into a functional ideal that resembled Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Despite the work of Scott and Technocracy Inc., in the 1940s, mainstream interest in the technocracy movement seemed to dissipate. Some researchers attribute this to a lack of a coherent political theory for achieving change, while others say that President Roosevelt and the New Deal provided an alternative solution to financial hardship. Whatever the cause, technocracy ceased to be a topic of mainstream political discourse. However, this was not the end of the technocratic movement. The Technotronic Era. The ideas that underpin the technocratic vision received a notable endorsement in the 1970s with the founding of the Trilateral Commission and the release of the book Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. The book was written by political scientist Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski was actually also involved in the founding of the Trilateral Commission as well. This was the beginning of a resurgence of technocratic thought.
But in the early 1970s, it came back to life again with a vengeance, and then it was picked up by big money people like David Rockefeller and political ideologues like Professor Zbigniew Brzezinski, who also was at Columbia University at the time, by the way. They started a group called the Trilateral Commission, which was, they co-founded it, but they started this group that brought in members from Japan, North America, and Europe to foster what they called at the time a new international economic order. I did not recognize in the 70s what that meant, what new meant. I know that's silly, but I had no frame of reference, didn't understand historic technocracy at the time. But that's what they said, a new international economic order. Well, time went by, and I did not understand it for a long time. I figured they're rearranging the deck chairs on the economic Titanic, so to speak, to play for them. But in the early, somewhere around 2006-07, I discovered historic technocracy for the very first time. And I immediately understood that this was the new international economic order that the Trilateral Commission was talking about in the early 1970s.
As Patrick Wood notes, until his death in 2018, Brzezinski was a diplomat who ran in the same circles as David Rockefeller and former Secretary of State and accused war criminal Henry Kissinger. Brzezinski served as advisor to several presidents, from Jimmy Carter to Barack Obama. He was the co-founder of the Trilateral Commission and also a member of the Atlantic Council, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Although Brzezinski's Between the Two Ages substituted the term technotronic for technocratic, the depiction of the future is the same, a world in which the scientific and technological elite centrally plan the lives of all humanity. Essentially, Brzezinski's vision is a technologically advanced, authoritarian-style collectivism wherein individual liberties are subordinated to the apparent needs of the collective. He explains technotronic in the following way. Quote, the post-industrial society is becoming a technotronic society, a society that is shaped culturally, psychologically, socially, and economically by the impact of technology and electronics, particularly in the area of computers and communications. In the Technocratic Society, scientific and technical knowledge, in addition to enhancing production capabilities, quickly spills over to affect almost all aspects of life directly. Accordingly, both the growing capacity for the instant calculation of the most complex interactions and the increasing availability of biochemical means of human control augment the potential scope of consciously chosen direction, and thereby also pressures to direct, to choose, and to change. Brzezinski believes that, quote, persisting social crisis, the emergence of a charismatic personality, and the exploitation of mass media to obtain public confidence would be stepping stones in the piecemeal transformation of the United States into the highly controlled technocratic society. In a moment of honesty, Brzezinski acknowledges that, quote, the fiction of sovereignty is clearly no longer compatible with reality because emerging global consciousness is causing the, quote, abandonment of preoccupations with national supremacy in favor of global interdependence. Brzezinski's vision of the future was not mere speculation or guesswork. He was a member of the ruling class who spent his life using nation-states and the people within them as pawns in a chess game in which most of the players are dangerously oblivious to the reality unfolding around them. I believe that Brzezinski's book describes the world that is unfolding in the 2020s. After receiving the endorsement and promotion of Brzezinski, the technocratic ideals made their way to other international organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum.
So this was picked up and launched and moved forward through the auspices of the United Nations in particular. It became the doctrine of sustainable development, which is now all over the world. It's more recently become things like the phrase "Build Back Better," the Great Reset, or Green New Deal in America. We see all kinds of policies wrapped around it. Typically, the death of fossil fuels, oil, coal, gas, and restrictions on where we could build, where we could go, and stuff like that. All of these things are related to this now in modern day time. This is technocracy today that's taking over. It's not socialism, it's not communism, and it's not fascism per se. There are very significant distinctives with technocracy. China is a technocracy, by the way. You can look at China and get a good idea of what it looks like. You have total micromanagement of the population through technology. You have social credit scoring system that tells people what they can and can't do. And they get punished if they make a wrong move or they do the wrong thing or they talk to the wrong person or whatever. These things were unheard of 30 years ago. Today, they're commonplace and they're creating a lot of fear in the minds of people. So this is the environment that we find ourselves in today with this emerging scientific dictatorship that's got a hold of the whole planet. It's not just America. It's not just Democrats and Republicans, so we got to get over that part. It's global in nature today.
The modern technocrats and the technocratic state. Now that we understand a bit of the history of technocracy and some of the ideas that it proposes, we need to examine the world of today, looking for signs of the technocratic influence. Let's start by looking at the wealthiest companies and most influential CEOs. These individuals are running companies that have amassed large amounts of financial wealth as well as unfathomable amounts of digital data on all of their customers. From Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Bill Gates of Microsoft, Mark Zuckerberg at Meta, Elon Musk of Tesla, and lesser-known names at Google, Apple, and other tech companies. In fact, with his belief in technological solutions as the answer to all of humanity's problems, Elon Musk appears to be walking a path similar to his grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, who was a research director for Technocracy Incorporated of Canada and national chairman of the Social Credit Party. These men and their colleagues in various technological industries wield immense power through their companies, wealth, and cultural influence. These individuals have enough money, resources, and connections to shape elections, geoengineer the climate, censor information, shape international food trends, and cause dips in the stock market. They are the technocrat class of today. But the technocratic world is not complete with the simple presence of technocrats. No, in order to bring about the vision of Scott, there must be mechanisms for understanding all of society's needs and making rational decisions about how to meet those needs. Do we see attempts to create this vision in our current era? As we outlined in our chapter on the foundations, we do indeed see organizations like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations partnering with technocrats to promote technocratic remedies to the various crises facing humanity. For example, we are told that humanity is facing a climate crisis that will require a complete overhaul of our world. The United Nations uses their influence with world governments to push them to align with the Sustainable Development Goals, a set of 17 goals ostensibly focused on fighting climate change, poverty, etc. At the same time, organizations like the World Economic Forum say that COVID-19 presented the perfect opportunity to reset capitalism and all of the world's systems as part of their Great Reset agenda. One of the answers being proposed to stop these apparent crises, specifically climate change, is to geoengineer the weather by spraying various particles out of the back of airplanes in an attempt to reflect sunlight and lower the average temperature on Earth. Technocrats like Bill Gates are using their immense wealth to finance projects like these, completely bypassing governments and giving the people no say in the matter altogether. Additionally, now that a precedent has been set for nations to lock down their populations in the name of fighting a pandemic, we are also seeing proposals for climate lockdowns. As early as September 2020, the term climate lockdown was used by Mariana Mazzucato, chair of the World Health Organization's Council on the Economics of Health for All. She wrote, quote, "Under a climate lockdown, governments would limit private vehicle use, ban consumption of red meat, and impose extreme energy-saving measures, while fossil fuel companies would have to stop drilling. To avoid such a scenario, we must overhaul our economic structures and do capitalism differently." We are also beginning to see proposals for carbon tracking apps which tell a person how much energy they are using. These could eventually become mandatory, preventing citizens who have used too much carbon from driving, taking public transportation, and other daily practices.
Where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker.
In an August 2021 article published in the journal Nature Sustainability, researchers argue in favor of personal carbon allowances, or PCAs. They write, quote, "In particular, during the COVID-19 pandemic, restrictions on individuals for the sake of public health and forms of individual accountability and responsibility that were unthinkable only 1 year before have been adopted by millions of people. People may be more prepared to accept the tracking and limitations related to PCAs to achieve a safer climate and the many other benefits associated with addressing the climate crisis." The authors also claim that the public's acceptance of contact tracing apps could lead to, quote, "insights into possible strategies to use apps to track personal carbon allowances." This type of solution and the entire response to COVID-19 illustrate the level of technocratic thinking that now pervades most governments and world bodies such as the World Health Organization. Both the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the World Economic Forum's Great Reset claim that the answer to our problems will be found in a complete digital transformation of our world, which they claim will be better for the environment, improve efficiency, and be more equitable for all people. Klaus Schwab, founder and director of the World Economic Forum, called this transformation the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is Schwab's pet project and the name of his 2016 book, where he calls for a world with ubiquitous digital surveillance, driverless vehicles, smart cities, social credit scores, the metaverse, and augmented reality. The World Economic Forum describes the Fourth Industrial Revolution as follows. Quote, "The first industrial revolution used water and steam power to mechanize production. The second used electric power to create mass production. The third used electronics and information technology to automate production. Now a fourth industrial revolution is building on the third, the digital revolution that has been occurring since the middle of the last century. It is characterized by a fusion of technologies that is blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres." To put it simply, the Fourth Industrial Revolution is the digital panopticon of the future, where surveillance is omnipresent and humanity uses technology to alter our lives. Often associated with terms like the Internet of Things, the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Humans, and the Internet of Senses, this world will be powered by 5G and 6G technology. Of course, for Schwab and other globalists, the Fourth Industrial Revolution also lends itself towards more central planning and top-down control, just like the technocratic vision of Howard Scott. The goal is a track and trace society where all transactions are logged, every person has a digital ID that can be tracked, and social malcontents are locked out of society via social credit scores. Similar to Klaus Schwab's Fourth Industrial Revolution, the original technocrats claimed that, quote, electronic devices would immediately tabulate data on the amount of spending and the type of consumption, with this information clearing continuously to the central headquarters. Both Scott and Schwab imagined using technology to know everything about everyone in society in the name of building a system that promised to deliver abundance to all people. According to Scott, with the technician king and control board at the head of the technate, they would control, quote, precise information at all times on the state of consumption of every kind of commodity or service in all parts of the country. And it would be possible for the, quote, technical elite to know precisely what the proper decisions were at all times in order to maintain the operation of the social mechanism at the highest possible load factor and efficiency. This technocratic vision is dependent on the use of surveillance tools like facial recognition, voice detection, 24/7 closed-circuit TV cameras, artificial intelligence, algorithmic manipulation, cell phone tracking, social media monitoring, location tracking, digital eavesdropping via smart devices, and the overall push towards a smart grid. Of course, these technologies are not promoted as surveillance tools, but rather as tools for safety, convenience, education, and profit. However, the result is the same. Individuals and companies promoting technological solutions to the world's ills, resulting in a loss of individual freedoms and more centralized control. Whether by design or accident of history, the modern technocrats, backed by their friends in venture capital firms, the obedient hacks in corporate media, and their partners in government, are becoming what Howard Scott called the technate, and what I call the technocratic state. Is there any way we can stop or avoid the growth of this tyrannical vision? Solutions: opting out of the technocratic state. It's much easier to identify the dangers that lie ahead than it is to provide practical solutions that work for a broad spectrum of people. Inevitably, prescriptions for alternative paths will not apply to all people in all situations. With that said, there are indeed opportunities for potentially preventing the rise of technocracy. As we have noted in previous chapters, one of the most important steps we can take as individuals is to educate those closest to us. In this case, we can educate them about the history of technocracy and the dangers it poses for our future. This could involve sharing this documentary, printing out flyers with relevant info and passing them out at local events, and/or protesting the corporations who are investing in technocratic methods and technologies. Cracking through the veil of ignorance to reach the masses is absolutely necessary if we are to overcome the threat.
Who are these global players that are trying to conquer the whole planet at the same time? That's the big question that we need to answer. And also, if we figure that out, I think we have, but if we figure that out, then we need to figure out what we're going to do about it. Because if we do nothing, not only is silence compliance, but they will win with their new international economic order, their sustainable development, their Green New Deal, their Great Reset, whatever you want to call it. They will win and we will lose.
Patrick Wood also believes the answer lies in critical thinking.
Number one, we need to learn how to interpret propaganda. The world is awash with propaganda. It's being controlled and manipulated by propaganda. And propaganda is a very specific type of misuse of language all around the world. It's intended to deceive the hearer, the reader, the listener. And propaganda is very deadly as far as the mind is concerned because it leads you off into believing things that simply are not true. We see propaganda on all kinds of topics, not just one topic. It's not just on, for instance, global warming or just about the pandemic and vaccines and this, that, things like that. The propaganda in the world today is just about every conceivable topic you can imagine. We need to learn how to see through propaganda, how to recognize it when we're presented with it. But the markers of propaganda are very clear, and they're not difficult to understand. The first part of what the solution is to realize when you're being lied to and to reject whatever it is they're trying to shove down your throat. I tell people routinely, don't comply. Now, I have to qualify that. When you feel like you're being given a role to play that is unnatural in some way, don't do it. Just don't play that role. Be an outlier. Just don't Don't cooperate. Don't participate with it. Now, if you're forced to, that's another issue. But you just can't submit and play the role that they want you to play in this society.
Ultimately, we choose if we want to adopt this digital dystopia. We don't have to accept every new upgrade or device. It's up to us to choose our principles over convenience.
Now, there's lots of things you can do. We know, for instance, we know Google's a problem. Okay, don't use Google. There are other alternative search engines that you can use. They may not be as convenient. They may not be as nicely programmed, but don't worry about it. Go use something else. Don't comply with Google. They'll suck every bit of data out of you they can. They won't pay you anything for it, and they'll turn around and use it against you in some way. They'll sell it, of course, to the highest bidder, but they'll use it against you ultimately. Don't participate. When you see that they've got a role for you, don't do it. There's lots of other things. We could talk about things like cell phones. This is going to be an issue at some point, smartphones, because all of the smartphone providers are collecting data. They're turning these around as instruments of control, and we're going to have to deal with that issue at some point. Are we going to continue with smartphones, or are we going to figure out other ways to get around these behemoths? There's alternative solutions coming on.
Mr. Wood is correct to question the assumption that humanity needs digital technology integrated into every aspect of our lives. While I wholeheartedly endorse and support the use of digital technology, we must acknowledge that this drive towards a digital world can only happen if we participate. Silent opposition and complaining on the internet are not enough. We must begin to lay the foundation for alternative parallel systems in the event that we cannot prevent the rise of the technocratic state. If you know for certain you don't want to participate in the digital ID initiatives or the digital wallet and central bank digital currencies, what is your alternative plan? Will you comply if your workplace adopts all digital forms of payment? Or if your bank allows you to withdraw funds only with your digital ID? Do you have a way to continue making money for yourself and family in these situations? We need to be honest with ourselves and think about what our red lines, our lines in the sand are. When is enough enough? The answer to that question will depend on your needs, resources, and community. We must build relationships with like-minded people in our local areas as soon as possible. The sooner we establish these relationships and begin growing our own food, exploring alternative physical and cryptocurrencies, creating homeschooling co-ops, and getting off big tech tools, the sooner we will see the creation of a network of communities which operate in a completely alternative, parallel economy with parallel institutions competing with the technocratic ones. One of the best ways to further the creation of this network is by joining the Freedom Cell network at freedomcells.org. Using the website maps, you can search to find individuals and groups in your area who are also looking for like-minded people. Once you make connections, begin meeting in the real world to establish real-world relationships. As a group, begin to set goals focused on getting off the mainstream control grids. The Freedom Cell Network, along with similar organizations, are helping to lay the foundation for the parallel systems of the future. In short, we must begin to exit from these slavery systems and build the foundation of the world we know is possible. To learn more about the history of technocracy, we recommend reading the following: Technocracy and the American Dream by William Aiken, Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation, and Technocracy, the Hard Road to World Order by Patrick Wood. For a deeper look at solutions for fighting the technocratic state, read How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State by Derrick Broze.
My name is Derrick Broze. For the last decade, I've worked as an investigative journalist, hosting a radio show, writing books, and producing numerous documentaries about the realities of child trafficking, the dangers of technology, and indigenous struggles. Now, I aim to uncover whether there exists a network which ties these issues together. Many researchers posit the existence of an international cartel which covertly manipulates world events for their own benefit. Are these claims simply fantasy and paranoid delusion? Or is there truly an agenda to subvert humanity to the demands of the pyramid of power.
Chapter 14: The False Flag Deception. While previous chapters have focused on the individuals and institutions which make up the pyramid of power, this chapter will focus on one of the tools wielded by the pyramid. We are going to dive into the debate surrounding so-called false flag attacks. A false flag operation is designed to create the appearance that an attack or an episode of violence is caused by a person or nation while concealing the true perpetrator. The reference to flags stems from pirates flying a fake flag pretending to be an ally of their intended target so they could get within attacking distance. It has also been used in naval and land warfare, with soldiers flying fake flags or wearing the military uniforms of their enemies while they frame them for the attacks. Author G. Edward Griffin has been investigating the pyramid of power since the 1960s. He believes false flags are an essential part of how those at the top manipulate the masses.
This was really a common tactic in history. It's a common tactic. It goes all the way back to Roman times. And certainly now with control over the means of communication, it makes false flag attacks easy because the communications are the sources of how people perceive who did it and how it happened. You can create it completely out of nothing if necessary, or you can pick and choose little pieces of truth and puzzle them together in a different way that they look like something different. It's relatively easy to convince the unsuspecting audience that something happened that really was false.
As Mr. Griffin notes, false flags are often a method of achieving a reaction in the public, usually fear. If one group wants to turn the public against their enemies, they might stage an attack dressed up as their enemies to damage their reputation and the eyes of the public. As we have outlined in previous chapters, the corporate media can be used to shape a narrative or pump fear, and big tech can be used to censor contradictory opinions on social media. Together, big tech, the ruling class media, and the string pullers behind governments can create reality out of a manufactured or staged event. Claims of false flag events are not exclusive to any one nation. The 1933 burning of the Reichstag building came just weeks after Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany and is believed by many to be a false flag operation organized by the Nazis to accelerate Hitler's rise to total domination. In post-World War II Europe, Operation Gladio was the codename for so-called stay-behind operations where the Western military-industrial complex, in the form of NATO and the CIA, worked with several European intelligence agencies to foment disorder and even stage false flag attacks. Daniel Ganser, Swiss author of NATO's Secret Armies, Operation Gladio and Terrorism in Western Europe, claims stay-behind movements associated with Gladio were linked to right-wing terrorism and responsible for terrorist attacks against Italy's civilian population. In the United States, we have declassified documents relating to Operation Northwoods, which were prepared by the Department of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff for President John F. Kennedy in 1962. The documents, titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, propose numerous plans for staging a false flag attack and blaming it on Cuba to justify a military attack on that nation. Some of the proposed plans included remotely controlling a civilian plane after it had been painted to look like a U.S. Air Force plane, a faked attack of a U.S. Air Force fighter off the coast of Cuba, the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, and sinking boats of Cuban refugees on the high seas. Other documents prepared by the DoD which contain proposals for false flag attacks include Operation Bingo, Operation Dirty Trick, and Operation Mongoose. There is also evidence that the attacks on the U.S. military base in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii were a successful false flag attack. However, in this example, rather than the U.S. government staging an attack and blaming it on an enemy, the U.S. government is accused of knowing of the attack and allowing it to happen so they could take advantage of the ensuing fear experienced by Americans.
I would welcome a chance to go to court and introduce evidence to prove that Pearl Harbor was a false flag. Because by this time in history, the evidence is out in the open. A lot of it was suppressed and hidden. A lot of it was destroyed. But enough of it exists that I think it would be really easy in a court of law if I were allowed to present the evidence, if the court weren't biased or corrupt in refused to let me present evidence. If I were free to present the evidence, I'm sure I could convince anyone that Pearl Harbor was a false flag attack against the United States. It was a real attack, but it was set up so in such a way that the Japanese were enticed into it. And we won't get into the details, but the leaders in the United States knew full well that the Japanese Navy was coming. They wanted them to come. They wanted to be attacked. And they wanted that excuse to be able to jump into World War II so that they could sit at the peace table and help and recarve up the world afterwards. So, no, I'm not sure I could do that in terms of 9/11, but I think I could. I think by now the evidence is equally clear. And with the passage of every year, and when the time comes when Mr. Bush is gone, and all the key players are gone, then I think there will be less resistance to looking at the idea that, yep, even 9/11, as horrible as that was indeed a false flag attack.
One of the most well-known modern examples of a claimed false flag is the attacks of September 11th, 2001. The attacks of 9/11 are one of the most heavily debated geopolitical events in the last few decades. The mainstream narrative surrounding 9/11 claims that Osama bin Laden operated a covert network of Muslim terrorists from a cave in the Middle East and was able to penetrate some of the most highly protected airspace in the world. This account says the Twin Towers in New York City collapsed because of the planes and the resulting fires. However, this official version of events has been debated endlessly in books, essays, conferences, and documentaries seeking to uncover the truth about that fateful day. This collective movement of authors, researchers, engineers, architects, scholars, firefighters, and activists has become known as the 9/11 Truth Movement. Skeptical of the official narrative on 9/11, they've organized groups to challenge it, including architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, firefighters for 9/11 Truth, pilots for 9/11 Truth, the International Center for 9/11 Justice, and other local activist groups and individuals from around the world. It's a loose-knit movement without an official position, and the opinions, theories, and ideas held among its members sometimes conflict with one another. However, those working within the broader movement are bound by the belief that the official narrative promoted by the US government is full of holes. Much of the 9/11 Truth Movement focus on the evidence for a likely controlled demolition being responsible for the collapse of the Twin Towers, as well as World Trade Center 7, World Trade Center 6, and other buildings which received little to no attention. Many witnesses reported hearing or seeing explosions coming from within or underneath the buildings before their collapse. As far as being a false flag, there are a number of competing theories as to who the real perpetrators are if the attacks were not the actions of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Some researchers point to the funding and influence from the Saudi kingdom, and others point to Pakistani involvement. The most prominent theories center around members of the United States and/or Israeli governments being involved in the planning, funding, and execution of the various elements of the 9/11 attacks. The theories around 9/11 have been explored in numerous quality documentaries, from the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, James Corbett of the Corbett Report, my own mini-documentary, Declassify the Truth, and many other qualified investigators. For this chapter, we are going to take a look at two lesser-known but equally important false flag events. The 1995 Oklahoma City bombings. On April 19, 1995, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City exploded at 9:02 a.m. and killed 168 people, including children, while destroying more than one-third of the building. The official story says that Timothy McVeigh, a military veteran, an alleged white supremacist, and a few accomplices set off a fertilizer bomb in a Ryder rental truck parked outside the building. While it's absolutely true that Timothy McVeigh was spotted at the federal building and had involvement in the planning of this attack, questions surrounding his true motives and other potential accomplices have led to many Oklahoma citizens challenging the official narrative. In fact, Charles Key, a former Republican member of the Oklahoma House of Representatives from 1986 to 1999, and again from 2006 to 2012, worked with Glenn Wilburn, whose grandsons were killed in the blast, to convene a grand jury in June 1997 to investigate claims of foreknowledge by the U.S. government and potential additional suspects. After 18 months and talking to more than 170 witnesses, the grand jury concluded, quote, "We cannot affirmatively state that absolutely no one else was involved in the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building." However, they added, quote, "We have not been presented with or uncovered information sufficient to indict any additional conspirators." The grand jury made an even stronger statement regarding claims of foreknowledge by the government, stating, quote, "We can state with assurance that we do not believe that the federal government had prior knowledge that this horrible terrorist attack was going to happen." The grand jury's statement did not stop Charles Key and other determined citizens of Oklahoma City. He was also involved in the formation of the Oklahoma City Bombing Investigation Committee, which brought the remaining questions to the attention of the local media and Oklahomans. The committee eventually released a final report in 2001, which made the case for McVeigh not having worked alone and for the FBI being aware of the attack prior to it happening. The 500-page report has testimony from individuals who argue that not only was Timothy McVeigh not acting alone, but the fertilizer bomb in the Ryder truck could not have caused the destruction on its own. In fact, retired Air Force Brigadier General Benton Parton reviewed the case and said that McVeigh's bomb alone could not have caused that much damage. Quote, "There is strong evidence that demolition charges were in the building," Parton wrote in a letter to a prosecutor in 1997. The best documentation of the many inconsistencies in the OKC bombing and the citizens' fight for truth comes from the documentary A Noble Lie. The documentary tells the stories of ATF agents being warned in advance.
Was the ATF office empty that morning?
I asked him if I could speak with an ATF officer that worked in the building so I could find out if they knew anything about my wife. And he told me that they were in debriefing. And I asked him, you know, I need to talk to one of them. I need to find out something. And he said that none of them had been in the building, so they weren't hurt. They'd been tipped by their pagers that morning not to come into work.
Exercises involving the bomb squad being in the area, other sightings of unknown suspects.
I had told you about the Ryder truck I had seen there before this.
Investigators doubting the official story.
Started doubting the official story that was coming out. You have to understand that the state, the local media were doing a good job the first day. Local law enforcement maybe also, I believe, was doing a good job. But once the feds came in, things started changing.
And how the story began shifting within days.
Who's going to investigate the investigators? Who's going to investigate the prosecutors? Who's going to hold them accountable? Who's going to hold us public officials accountable? And that's all we're trying to do here, in addition to trying to find the truth.
Well, initially that morning, all the media that was downtown there were reporting the truth. They reported the truth about the unexploded bombs, undetonated bombs being removed from the building. By afternoon, things began to ease a little bit. You could sense a difference, and by the next day, everybody but Channel 4 had changed their story completely.
A Noble Lie also tells the story of Hoppy Heidelberg, a member of the grand jury who says the jury was stifled in a number of ways and not given full access to information they needed.
See, we were never allowed to see the photo evidence from the cameras on the Murrah building that would have shown the truck being parked and the people who got out of the truck. That's all on tape. And we were authorized to see all of that, but we weren't allowed to see it. And in fact, nobody's been allowed to see it. All those tapes have been kept under wraps for 15 years.
One of the most troubling aspects of the OKC bombing investigation involved Officer Terrence Yakey, who began privately investigating the bombings after growing suspicious of the official investigation. Terrence Yakey, better known as Terry, rescued victims after the explosions and was awarded the Medal of Valor for his work. However, Terry did not want the medal because he grew to suspect he was being lied to about the true causes of the explosion. Yakey was collecting evidence when he turned up dead from an apparent suicide, which immediately drew suspicion from family and fellow officers. His body was found parked in his car off a country road with his wrist slit, his neck slit, and a gunshot wound to the head. The story of Terry Yakey has even grown to the point that mainstream outlets like CNN were forced to report on his story in March 2023, asking, "Why did this cop turn up dead?" Yakey's sister, LaShawn Hargrove, told CNN he had questions about how the explosion took place and the blast pattern. She said he asked, quote, "You know how they said the truck blew in? He saw evidence of blowing out." If true, this would be evidence of bombs within the building blowing outwards. Yakee's ex-wife, Tonya, has also stated that she drove him back to the federal building at night because he wanted to see the site when there would be less people around. She told CNN they headed to the building around 9:30 or 10, and Terry wanted to get a picture underneath where the daycare had been. She says the two were stopped by some government officials, either ATF or FBI, who refused to let him through. Tonya has also claimed that Terry wrote a detailed police report for the OKC Police Department. One day, Yakee showed up at their house upset because he said his police report had disappeared. He claimed his bosses were telling him to write a new one-page report. She also said she remembered getting an angry call from one of Yakee's supervisors asking him where he was and demanding that he turn in his report or be reprimanded. The OKC PD has declined to answer questions relating to Terry Yakee's report or its alleged disappearance. A Noble Lie also shares testimony from Yakee's family showing that no autopsy was done after his death. Needless to say, questions surrounding the OKC bombing continue to this day. Many who believe the event was a false flag attack suspect that Timothy McVeigh was either a complete patsy or unaware of the bigger operation taking place around him. The bombing was promoted by the US government and the corporate media as yet another sign that domestic extremism and domestic terrorism were on the rise in the United States, a rallying cry which continues in the political climate of the 2020s. It's also important to understand that the bombing of OKC led to the passage of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, which was introduced by then-Senator Joe Biden. The bill was criticized for taking steps to remove habeas corpus protections. Biden, currently President of the United States, has often claimed that his bill was the precursor of the Patriot Act.
Just to set the record straight, almost the same thing that got passed, the Patriot Act, was introduced by me in 1994, and it was the right wing that defeated it. You guys tried to help get it passed, including the wiretap changes and the rest.
Which was also criticized for attacking civil liberties in the post-9/11 era. This is one reason why it's important to understand the false flag deception. These attacks build on top of each other, creating more and more panic in the minds and hearts of the public, which allows the pyramid of power to advance their agenda of control and domination. The 2018 Syria gas attack claims. The Syrian civil war has been raging since 2012. The conflict has numerous factions and rivalries, and other various militias. Throughout the decade-long conflict, there have been a number of claimed chemical attacks which have resulted in the deaths of an uncertain number of Syrian people. The deadliest claimed attacks were the August 2013 sarin attack in Ghouta, which killed hundreds and injured thousands. The April 2017 sarin attack in Khan Shaykhun, which is alleged to have killed 89 people, and the April 2018 claimed chemical attacks in Douma, which allegedly killed 43 people and injured 500 more. The official version of events says that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was responsible for these attacks. Assad denies involvement and claims that if the attacks happened, they were the result of rebel groups on the ground, not the Syrian Air Force dropping chemical weapons. We don't have the space in this report to fully examine each of these claims, so we're going to focus on the 2018 Douma chemical attacks. It's these claimed attacks where Americans and people around the world were shown images of women and children foaming at the mouth after allegedly being exposed to toxic chemicals. It was these images of dead children which led then-President Donald Trump to join with France and the United Kingdom to drop bombs on Syria on April 14, 2018. Without waiting for a proper investigation, President Trump ordered the United States military to drop more than 100 Tomahawk missiles on Damascus. On April 16th, 2 days after the alleged gas attacks, several journalists gained access to Douma and interviewed residents in the area. One of these journalists was Robert Fisk, two-time winner of the British Press Awards Journalist of the Year prize and seven-time winner of the British Press Awards Foreign Correspondent of the Year. Fisk is a longtime foreign correspondent who the New York Times referred to as, quote, probably the most famous foreign correspondent in Britain, and The Guardian called him, quote, one of the most famous journalists in the world. Writing for The Independent, Fisk described the situation in Douma. This is the story of a town called Douma, a ravaged, stinking place of smashed apartment blocks and of an underground clinic whose images of suffering allowed 3 of the Western world's most powerful nations to bomb Syria last week. There's even a friendly doctor in a green coat who, when I track him down in the very same clinic, cheerfully tells me that the gas videotape which horrified the world, despite all the doubters, is perfectly genuine. War stories, however, have a habit of growing darker, for the same 58-year-old senior Syrian doctor then adds something profoundly uncomfortable. The patients, he says, were overcome not by gas, but by oxygen starvation and the rubbish-filled tunnels and basements in which they lived, on a night of wind and heavy shelling that stirred up a dust storm. According to the doctor Fisk spoke with, Dr. Asim Rahabini, the international organization commonly known as the White Helmets had a role in carrying out the false or exaggerated scene depicting a chemical gas attack. I was with my family in the basement of my home, 300 meters from here on the night, but all the doctors know what happened. There was a lot of shelling by government forces, and aircraft were always over Douma at night, but on this night, there was wind and huge dust clouds began to come into the basements and cellars where people lived. People began to arrive here suffering from hypoxia, oxygen loss. Then someone at the door, a white helmet, shouted gas, and a panic began. People started throwing water over each other. Yes, the video was filmed here, it is genuine, but what you see are people suffering from hypoxia, not gas poisoning. At the same time that Fisk was interviewing the doctors and residents, Pearson Sharp of One America News stated he interviewed between 30 to 40 residents of Douma. As with Fisk, Sharp says he found no evidence of chemical attack, and the residents he spoke with seemed completely unaware of the apparent incident. There was also a report from the German news station ZDF, which claimed the attacks were staged. While speaking on ZDF, correspondent Uli Gack reportedly stated, quote, "People told us in a very convincing manner that this whole story was staged." According to Gack's commentary, he also noted that, quote, "the militants brought canisters containing chlorine to the area." Critics of these claims say that the witnesses may have been threatened or coached by Syrian or Russian government officials. In fact, some saw the presence of Russian military police as a sign that some witnesses may have been tampered with or instructed what to say to the incoming foreign press. However, discrepancies in the story of the Syrian gas attacks don't end there. In May 2019, the Working Group on Syria, Propaganda and Media published a document signed by a man named Ian Henderson, an expert inspector with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, as far back as 1998 and as recently as 2018. The report concludes, quote, "The dimensions, characteristics, and appearance of the cylinders and surrounding scene of the incidents were inconsistent with what would have been expected in the case of either cylinder being delivered from an aircraft. Instead, they believed a manual placement of the cylinders in the locations investigators found them is, quote, the only plausible explanation for observations at the scene." In November 2019, WikiLeaks began releasing leaked documents from the OPCW, including publishing an internal email written by a member of the OPCW fact-finding mission to Syria. The documents make clear that the OPCW report, published in July 2018, which found Assad was responsible for the attacks, was shaped to conform with the public allegations made by the US, UK, and France. British Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens reported on the OPCW emails, noting that the doctrine of the OPCW fact-finders report, quote, "appears to be the worst instance of sexing up in support of war since the invasion of Iraq and Tony Blair's doctored dossiers." The emails show an OPCW investigator contacting OPCW Chief of Cabinet Robert Fairweather and his deputy, Amer Shouket, on June 22, 2018, to raise grave concern about the details that had been excluded from or changed in the soon-to-be-published redacted report on the agency's investigation into the alleged gas attacks. He wrote that the redacted report had strayed so far from the evidence collected that it, quote, "no longer reflects the work of the team." The email highlights statements that misrepresent the evidence collected in the on-the-spot investigation, including the assertion that the team had found, quote, "sufficient evidence at the time to determine that chlorine or another reactive chlorine-containing chemical was likely released from cylinders." Another claim in the official report, that high levels of chlorinate organic derivatives were detected at the site of the alleged attack, was also false. According to the investigator, these chemicals were found in trace amounts as low as 1 to 2 parts per billion. In December 2019, journalist Tarek Haddad resigned from Newsweek after he said his attempts to publish newsworthy revelations about the leaked OPCW letter were refused for no valid reason. Quote, "I have collected evidence of how they suppressed the story, in addition to evidence from another case where info inconvenient to the US government was removed. though it was factually correct, Haddad said. Quote, I plan on publishing these details in full shortly. However, after asking my editors for comment, as is journalistic practice, I received an email reminding me of confidentiality clauses in my contract, i.e., I was threatened with legal action. I interviewed Haddad shortly after his resignation, and he explained to me that he believed the story of the OPCW leaks was newsworthy, but his editor and publisher sought to prevent the story from being seen by the public. Thanks to the work of Derrick Haddad and independent journalists, the story of the OPCW leaks and the lies surrounding the alleged chemical attacks have not been forgotten. Another outlet and journalist responsible for keeping this story alive is the Gray Zone and Aaron Mate. In September 2020, Mate spoke at the United Nations Security Council on the OPCW's ongoing Syria scandal. In his remarks, Aaron calls this, quote, one of the most important and overlooked global stories in recent memory, and urges the United Nations and OPCW to let the OPCW investigators air their concerns and present the evidence that was suppressed. In March 2023, Mate once again spoke at the UN Security Council about the continuing cover-up of the OPCW leaks and the lies of the Syrian civil war. The Gray Zone has consistently been one of the few outlets covering the updates on the OPCW scandal over the years, including testimony by former OPCW investigator Ian Henderson in January 2020, and an interview with former OPCW chief Jose Bustani, where he defends the whistleblowers who challenged a cover-up of the Syria probe. The fact of the matter is that once again, governments and intelligence agencies and their friends in the corporate media lied to the public over and over in order to craft a false narrative and perception. What can we do when governments and intelligence agencies perpetrate such horrendous actions? How do we move forward knowing that these institutions believe it is acceptable to use human lives as pawns in their geopolitical games? Are there any solutions for such a harrowing attack on humanity? Solutions. The solution to raising awareness of false flag operations is simple. Question authority. Do it loudly and do it often. When we are shown these catalyzing events, such as the OKC bombing, 9/11, the Christmas tree bomber, the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber, the Syria gas attacks, the 7/7 London tube bombings, and yes, COVID-19, we must do our due diligence to interrogate the official narratives being spoon-fed to us. This doesn't mean we must or should believe every random theory that pops up after world-shifting events. We must also remember that the intelligence networks seek to confuse, delay, and disrupt our activities by having us chasing our tails and fighting about theories we might not be able to prove. Rather than getting sucked into a place of division and animosity for anyone who doesn't subscribe to your specific theory or worldview, we ought to seek to better understand each other. I've spent years down at Ground Zero in New York City passing out flyers, marching and chanting, and trying to get people to understand the lies we've been fed about that specific event. The times I felt most successful were the times when I had the opportunity to talk one-on-one with individuals and really hear their concerns, their resistance, and their fears, while explaining to them that I was not anti-American or anti-whatever, but I was in fact pro-truth. The only way we can stop these institutions from continuing the false flag trend is to call it out as soon as we see the lies. Call it out as soon as we see the telltale signs of a false flag, including multiple suspects being ignored to focus on one individual or group, drills or exercises taking place near the site of the attack on the same day or within weeks or months prior.
Just to get this right, you were actually working today on an exercise that envisioned virtually this scenario.
Almost precisely. I was up until 2 o'clock this morning because it's our job, my own company, Visor Consultants. We specialize in helping people to get their crisis management response. How do you jump from slow time thinking to quick time doing? And we chose a scenario with their assistance, which is based on a terrorist attack because they're very close to a property occupied by Jewish businessmen. They're in the city, and there are more American banks in the city than there are in the whole of New York. A logical thing to do. And I've still got the...
I was going to say, how extraordinary today must feel for you as it unfolds.
An immediate rush to pass new legislation to protect the vulnerable population from further attacks. And, of course, demonizing of anyone who dares challenge the official narrative. When you see these signs, remain skeptical. Don't buy into every theory that pops up on social media. Take your time to sit back, let the dust settle, and the facts begin to emerge. Don't forget to remember the victims who are killed or injured in these attacks. Do not allow their pain and suffering to be forgotten in either our debates about theories or the mainstream's false version of events. Together, we can challenge authority, we can question narratives, and we can uncover the truth as we finally put an end to the false flag deception. To learn more about the false flag attacks of Oklahoma City and the Syrian gas attacks, I encourage you to watch A Noble Lie and The Duma Hoax, Anatomy of a False Flag by James Corbett. Thank you for watching.
My name is Derrick Broze. For the last decade, I've worked as an investigative journalist, hosting a radio show, writing books, and producing numerous documentaries about the realities of child trafficking, the dangers of technology, and indigenous struggles. Now, I aim to uncover whether there exists a network which ties these issues together. Many researchers posit the existence of an international cartel which covertly manipulates world events for their own benefit. Are these claims simply fantasy and paranoid delusion, or is there truly an agenda to subvert humanity to the demands of the pyramid of power?
Chapter 15: The Pedo-Class. Warning: this episode contains vivid discussions of child abuse. Viewer discretion is advised. The longer one spends time tumbling down the rabbit hole, researching the various pieces of the pyramid of power, the more likely you are to learn about examples of child abuse. From teachers and sports coaches to law enforcement and celebrities and politicians, it certainly appears as if there is a society-wide problem with pedophilic behavior and the abuse of young children. Unfortunately, examples of this behavior can be found in all political parties, religions, ethnicities, professions, and lifestyles. A quick search on the news on any given day will reveal stories of arrests made on the local, regional, national, and international levels. Even organizations like the Boy Scouts of America have not been immune to claims of sexual abuse of children. Demographic data on pedophiles shows they are generally above average intelligence and live what appear to be normal and respectable lives. The Guardian reported in 2007 that restricted Scotland Yard documents show that the UK's child abusers are usually white males aged between 36 to 45. The majority are in long-term relationships, married, or have children. Almost all have no previous convictions of sexual abuse. Let's dive deeper into the definition of pedophilia. What is pedophilia? Pedophilia is defined as a sexual perversion or psychiatric disorder in which an adult or older adolescent experiences a primary or exclusive sexual attraction to prepubescent children. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, says a pedophilic disorder is defined as a pattern of pedophilic arousal accompanied by either subjective distress or interpersonal difficulty, or having acted on that arousal. Despite the public often labeling any instance of child abuse as pedophilia, the psychiatric diagnostic criteria for pedophilia considers the cutoff point for prepubescence to be 13 years old. In fact, several subtypes of pedophilia exist based on the specific age group which arouses the individual. For example, infantophilia or nepiophilia refers to a sexual preference for children under the age of 5, especially infants and toddlers, while hebephilia is defined as individuals with a primary or exclusive sexual interest in children aged 11 to 14 years old. Finally, ephebophiles have a primary sexual interest in mid to late adolescents, generally ages 15 to 19 years old. This would mean, for example, that the infamous sex offender Jeffrey Epstein was not a pedophile, but would more accurately be termed a hebephile because the majority of the young girls he abused were young teenagers. Previous chapters of this series have covered Jeffrey Epstein's alleged connections to Israeli and British intelligence services, as well as his numerous relationships with celebrities, scientists, politicians, journalists, and other high-profile socialites. Either way, regardless of these distinctions, we continue to see consistent reports detailing the abuse of young children and teenagers across all sectors of society. We are going to focus on two lesser-known incidents of child abuse allegations which intersect with government, intelligence agencies, and religious institutions. What can we learn by understanding these dark chapters in history? Is there a common thread to these horrific situations? We should also consider the possibility that there is an effort to conceal the prevalence of pedophilia and child abuse. The Finders Cult. Accusations of pedophilia with links to the CIA. In 2018, I began researching the group known as the Finders Cult, an eccentric group of parents who claim to be traveling journalists who were accused of being involved in everything from child trafficking, pedophilia, Satanism, and connections to the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. In pursuit of this topic, I would spend months combing through obscure forums, police documents, tracking down former members of the Finders, and former police officers who had worked on the case in the late 1980s. I ended up releasing a documentary titled "Who Will Find What the Finders Hide?", telling the story of the mysterious group and the incident which made them infamous around the world. The story goes like this. The Finders Cult was a young group of men, women, and children who claimed to be nothing more than former hippies living an alternative lifestyle and practicing alternative parenting. The Finders were founded by a mysterious man named Marion Petty, who had military intelligence connections and was nicknamed the Game Caller. He believed in turning his life and the lives of those around him into a constant game or experiment. The Finders members followed Petty's every order without question. The trouble for the group began in Florida on Wednesday, February 4th, 1987, when an anonymous caller told the Tallahassee Police Department that two well-dressed men were at a local park with 6 kids and a blue van. The children were described as looking disheveled with potential signs of abuse. Tallahassee police arrived and questioned the two men, Douglas E. Ammerman and Michael Houlihan, members of the Finders who said they were taking the kids to a school for brilliant children in Mexico. The men also said the children were being weaned from their mothers. Authorities eventually took the men and the children into custody. A search of the van turned up 20 floppy computer disks, a TSR-80 computer, and a device that police said could be used to hook into a computer in another location by telephone. Immediately it became clear that this case was not like any other. Following the arrests, the Associated Press reported that police had moved the children from a shelter after receiving a half-dozen calls threatening the kids. The Associated Press reported, quote, "Children were moved to an undisclosed location where they were being protected by armed guards." When interviewed by the police, the kids claimed the men were their teachers and that they had been living in a house with other children and adults. The children were unaware of modern technology, including phones, televisions, hot water, staplers, typewriters, and electricity. The oldest child said they received instructions from a man they called a game caller or a game leader. The Washington Post reported that a confidential police source previously told the authorities the Finders were a cult that conducted brainwashing techniques at a warehouse and apartment in Washington, D.C. The source told of being recruited by the Finders with promises of financial reward and sexual gratification, and of being invited by one member to explore Satanism. At that point, officials with the U.S. Customs Service Agency joined the investigation due to suspicion that the potential crimes may have crossed state or national borders. The U.S. Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigations were also said to have been investigating the case. After learning the children were based in the D.C. area, the Tallahassee Department contacted D.C. Metropolitan Police to establish the identities of the children. Tallahassee Police spokesman Scott Hunt told reporters that D.C. police were already aware of the Finders. On Friday, February 6th, Virginia State Police raided a 90-acre farm owned by Marion Petty in rural Madison County, Virginia. Neighbors of the farm said children were often brought to the farm in vans, usually crying. An FBI report states that the evidence of a satanic cult ritual was discovered. The same report notes that all reports regarding finders are to be classified as secret. Meanwhile, D.C. Metro Police and U.S. Customs Service agents raided other finders' properties, including a duplex apartment building and warehouse in Washington, D.C. Police reports and articles from 1987 indicate that the D.C. police removed large plastic bags filled with color slides, photographs, and photographic contact sheets from the warehouse. Some of the photos were of naked children. U.S. Customs spokesman David Hoover told the Post, quote, "We're not saying that it's pornographic, but it has all the earmarks." A U.S. Customs Service report filed by Customs Agent Ramon Martinez described some of the photos as showing blood rituals involving children slaughtering goats while adult in white robes watched. Martinez's report also mentioned that police had found instructions on how to purchase children. By Monday, February 9th, 5 days after the children and their 2 male chaperones were arrested, the Metropolitan Police announced that they had found no evidence of wrongdoing or satanic activity by the finders. Health officials in Florida then said they had no evidence of sexual abuse of the children. D.C. Metro Police Chief Maurice Turner Jr. stated that the department had not uncovered any evidence to, quote, "collaborate allegations made by an informant that the organization is a cult and that its activities involve satanic rituals." By Thursday, February 12th, the FBI's Washington field office also said the investigation had not uncovered any evidence of federal violations. However, according to the New York Times reporting at the time, quote, "The statement from the Metropolitan Police Department conflicts with accounts from the police in Tallahassee, Florida, where the children were found unwashed and hungry, and that officials there say that at least 2 of the children had signs of sexual abuse." Tallahassee Police Reports. This report from the New York Times was confirmed in 2018 when 75 pages of Tallahassee police reports were finally released to the public. The documents make it clear that when the eldest child was questioned about sexual abuse, she became very evasive. She said there was no bad touches between the children and adults, and reportedly became fidgety and wanted the interview to end. The same police report mentions that an official with the Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services said 2 children were confirmed cases of sexual abuse. Jane Patia, with the Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services, stated that a Dr. Moorer had found one of the children lacked, quote, "anal sphincter control, consistent with acts of sodomy." Also, one of the girls had signs consistent with vaginal penetration by the fingers. Despite these reports, by February 24th, lead investigator Rick Huffman officially ended the Tallahassee Police Department's investigation into the finders. Huffman did not mention the reports of sexual abuse by the doctors with the HRS. The release of the Tallahassee Police Department documents add more evidence to the theory that agencies within the federal government covered up the crimes of the finders. This alleged cover-up even made headlines in 1993 when U.S. News & World Report reported that the Department of Justice was initiating a new investigation into allegations that the CIA was somehow connected to the Finders cult and had worked to cover up the case. U.S. Customs Agent Ramon Martinez, as well as local police officers in Tallahassee, had spent the previous years attempting to alert the authorities to the apparent cover-up. After interviewing dozens of people directly involved in the case and reviewing hundreds of documents, the DOJ concluded there was no evidence of child abuse or trafficking, satanic cult activity, or law enforcement complicity. In the minds of the authorities, the case was closed. However, as we have uncovered here, there are many details that ought not be forgotten. While it may be easy to dismiss these claims as nothing more than conspiracy, it's difficult to ignore the statements from the Tallahassee Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services regarding signs of sexual abuse. We also have the original reports from Customs Agent Ramon Martinez describing detailed information relating to trafficking of children. While participating in the raid of the Finders warehouse, Martinez conducted a limited search of the documents and claimed he saw many suspicious details, including detailed instructions for obtaining children for unspecified purposes and another message specifically ordering the purchase of 2 children in Hong Kong to be arranged through a contact in the Chinese embassy. In October 2018, I spoke with Ramon Martinez via email about his experience, his claims of a cover-up, and whether or not he still stood by his story. In one email, Martinez made it clear that he stands by his original report and does not believe anyone will be held responsible. On November 1st, 2018, Martinez wrote, quote, "Nothing's ever come of any info I've provided over the years except professional grief. I have no delusions of anyone ever being held accountable for what I know happened. I decided I would fly across the United States to attempt to meet Martinez in person to encourage him to go public with his knowledge of a government cover-up of the abuse of children. Martinez kindly told me to F off and stay away from him. He has since refused to answer my emails or my phone calls." In September 2018, I became the first person in more than 30 years to interview a member of the Finders on the record. I spoke with the Finders spokesperson Robert Terrell, a man who was the self-described right-hand man for Marion Petty. Terrell told the story of how he became involved with the Finders after he helped a friend get a job.
When he got to town, this friend of mine suggested that he talk to me and see if I could help him get a job, which I did. I sent him over to this real estate developer, and the real estate developer turned him over to the superintendent, who happened to be M.D. Petty's son, George Petty. George hired him, and Michael came back to my office to thank me and invited me to come over to visit this group of people who were all working for George and living in a community in D.C. that had come to be known as the New Ark. He told me that the door was never locked and I was welcome to come by any time and meet the folks, so that sounded interesting.
In early 1972, Terrell would begin visiting the Finders' house, the New Ark, and eventually meet Marion Petty. Terrell said he was fascinated and impressed by Petty.
And I went back to visit him again and realized that he was a spiritual teacher. Based on the questions that he asked me. And so I asked him some questions as well.
After meeting Petty, Terrell decided to move into the New Ark with the Finders and traveled with them around the country. Soon after, Terrell's wife filed for divorce. After giving the majority of his savings to his ex-wife and children, Terrell then used his remaining savings to purchase several buildings for the Finders. It is these buildings which would later be raided by the police. I asked Terrell directly about the 1987 arrests and the claims of child abuse involving the Finders.
I want to give you an opportunity just to answer as clearly as possible, and if you can restate the question, just to make it clear for the audience.
Yeah, sure.
Is there any truth to the Finders, the New Ark, having involvement with trafficking children, with child molestation, with child pedophilia, any of these sort of things that have come up in the last 2 or 3 decades?
Absolutely. There was no child molestation. There was no trafficking children. That was a complete fantasy, fiction.
Terrell claims that the rumors of Satanism and child abuse came from a disgruntled former member of the Finders who reported these allegedly false claims to the police in an effort to get back at an ex-boyfriend.
There was a man named Alan Schoen who was a part of the Finders, and he met a woman outside, and they became close friends, and after a while, I don't know what was going on between the two of them, but he pulled away from her. He had told her something about our effort to raise free children, and she went to the D.C. police and told them that we were a satanic cult. And so they opened an investigation. I don't know what a satanic cult is, or even whether it's against the law, but...
Was this in D.C.? Was this investigation? She went to the D.C. police, or?
Yes, it was in D.C. And as evidence of the fact that we were a satanic cult, she took a police officer into the park. Our apartment buildings were right next to Glover Archibald Park, which is a 400-acre park in downtown D.C. It's a wonderful place. And if you walk out the back door of our apartment buildings, you walk onto a trail in Glover Archibald Park, and she took the police officer there and showed him that there was a circle of stones where someone had had a campfire. And this was the evidence that we were a satanic cult, that we had campfires. It was not us. I mean, I don't know where that came from, but that was enough evidence for them to open an investigation.
In March 2019, 5 months after I spoke with Terrell, I released my documentary, Who Will Find What the Finders Hide, sharing the details of the Finders' story, including my interview with Terrell. The documentary attracted significant attention and introduced a new generation of true crime sleuths to the story of the Finders. In October 2019, only 6 months after the release of my documentary, the FBI began releasing hundreds of pages of previously unreleased documents relating to the Finders. Between October 2019 and May 2022, the FBI released 4 sets of documents. Most of the documents contain references to elements of the story which have been widely known to the public. However, some of the pages add further corroboration to the claims that the Finders had some type of involvement with the U.S. intelligence community, particularly the CIA. For example, on page 66 of the first FBI document dump, we find a page from the Washington Metro Police Department's investigation into the Finders titled Summary. It states, quote, "It is this writer's belief that the Finders organization is and has been utilized by the CIA as a disinformation service, spreading non-essential, non-critical information to various organizations throughout the United States and overseas." Regarding the allegations of abuse of children, the redacted author writes, quote, "I do not think that child abuse was a planned tactic of this group, but as in any cross-section of society, sick and demented subjects belong to a cult as well. I do believe the shaping of the children is a planned experiment of this group, as in the case of the Nazis, they strove for a perfect society. Thereby, in their own way, they tried to form a group of children and ultimately adults that did not suffer from the ills of normal society." The unknown law enforcement officer who wrote the report also stated that it was his belief that the Finders did not disband, but, quote, "as reported in their master plan, have only appeared to disband to prevent further detection from law enforcement and social service officials." The officer concludes his summary by calling for the Finders to be monitored. I interviewed Robert Terrell again in October 2021, nearly 3 years after our first discussion and 2.5 years after my documentary was released. He was unhappy with the conclusions of my documentary and made it clear to me that he did not think I was a credible journalist.
I thought I had good rapport with you. I liked you. You seem like a very nice guy. But somehow or other, you got the wrong idea of what the Finders were about. The Finders were a utopian community that recognized the kind of turmoil that the earth is now in and wanted to do something about it. So we experimented with different ways of living together and raising children so that they would be able to cope with the kind of nonsense that the world has now fallen into. So you could call it a failed experiment, but you can't call it a conspiracy to do the kind of things that the conspiracy theorists online accuse the Finders of being. We were not that. We were a utopian community that was founded on higher principles than making more money and living a life of comfort. There's a difference between a truth seeker and a comfort seeker. We were truth seekers. So I hope that when you ask me questions, like you said you had a couple of questions, that's great, glad to answer them. I hope that you will take the answers within the context of what I have just said.
Sure.
Because I'm telling you the truth. And I hope that you will re-examine the nonsense that is online about the Finders. It's absurd stuff that is put online because of some kind of a problem that the people who put it online have with themselves. has nothing to do with who we were. So go ahead and ask me your questions, and I hope that they will not just be questions that you can grab a hold of and use to reinforce the conclusions that you have already reached.
Sure. We had a heated discussion about what the documents say and what Mr. Terrell says.
The questions that you are asking me are not questions that are aimed at understanding the finders and determining whether you have a...
I'm trying to understand why what you told me last time conflicts what I have now with government documents. The second question is, there's clear, in two different police reports, we have two different officers saying that the CIA intervened in the investigation as well as the Foreign Counterintelligence Agency. That is not my words, it's not conspiracy theorists online, it is in government documents, clearly written. We have this all now once the FBI started releasing the files. So I'm asking you, as somebody who says that's hogwash, to respond.
Give me the wording, I didn't catch that.
The officer who's redacted and unnamed says specifically that the investigation had been taken over by the CIA and had become an internal CIA matter, and they also mentioned the Foreign Counterintelligence Agency.
What is your agenda to be questioning this? I mean,
I'm just looking at the police documents and trying to make heads or tails of what really happened. Obviously, talking to people like yourself, talking to people like the customs agent, Ramon Martinez, who filed the report, talking to people involved in these things.
He was fired for incompetence. Fired for incompetence.
In his view, he would say his career was destroyed because he tried to bring things to the table that nobody wanted to hear. That's his perspective.
What did he see? He said he saw that we were ordering children.
He says he saw pictures of naked children. He said instructions from buying children from China, detailed financial records, a number of different things. And
buying children from China.
This is what he says he saw. And he also says that when he went back to go view the evidence, he was not allowed to see the evidence again that had been collected.
As of 2024, no former member of the Finders or their children have come forward to admit involvement with child abuse or connections to intelligence agencies. The Utah investigation into ritualized child sexual abuse. On May 31, 2022, the Utah County Sheriff's Office released a statement detailing how multiple county and federal agencies are investigating reports of ritualistic child sex abuse from as far back as 1990. The sheriff's statement noted that the investigation into ritualistic child sexual abuse and child sex trafficking in Utah County began in April 2021. The investigation subsequently discovered previous reports alleging, quote, similar forms of ritualistic sexual abuse and trafficking that occurred in Utah County, Juab County, and Sanpete County between 1990 and 2010. The sheriff's office stated that portions of these allegations had been confirmed and were being investigated by the Utah County Sheriff's Office in cooperation with other local and federal agencies. The statement called on the victims or individuals with knowledge of the events to contact the Utah County Sheriff's Office Special Victims Unit. Following the announcement, I reached out to Sergeant Spencer Cannon, the Public Information Officer with the Utah County Sheriff's Office, asking him to clarify what was meant by ritualistic sexual abuse. Sergeant Cannon said that this type of case, quote, typically involves a religious component or people from a religious group. Cannon stated, quote, it can also be systematic abuse that happens over an extended period. In a strange twist of events, David Levitt, the Utah County attorney at the time, held his own press conference calling for the resignation of Utah County Sheriff Mike Smith, the man leading the investigation into ritualized child abuse. Although the Utah County Sheriff's Office statement never mentioned Levitt as a suspect, he claimed he and his wife were potential suspects and claimed the sheriff's investigation was politically motivated. David Levitt is the younger brother of former three-time Utah Governor Michael Okerlund Levitt. The father of the two men is Dixie Levitt, the founder of the Levitt Group, one of the largest independent insurance brokers in the nation. The entire Levitt family is connected to the Church of Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, aka the Mormon Church. During his press conference, Levitt stated,
I learned that my wife and I were part of those allegations, alleging that we were guilty of cannibalizing young children and murdering young children.
Levitt claimed the new investigation is related to charges filed against a former therapist more than 10 years ago. He noted that the man was charged in connection to allegations of raping someone he knew from the church. Levitt also claimed the charges were dismissed in 2014 because, quote, the evidence was so outlandish and so unbelievable. Levitt provided the local media with a 151-page document labeled as Victim Statement that described the alleged crimes. The document included Levitt's name, as well as more than a dozen people accused of practicing ritual sexual abuse of children, cannibalism, and murder. Levitt described the report as 151 pages of utter baloney and called the woman who made the allegations, quote, tragically mentally ill. He called for Sergeant Spencer Cannon and Sheriff Mike Smith to resign. Levitt also called for an independent investigation into the case to see where the case documents originated from. Levitt accused the sheriff's office of attempting to interfere with the primary elections, which were only weeks away at the time. Salt Lake City Fox affiliate Fox 13 News also reported that, quote, multiple confidential sources confirmed the new investigation related to a therapist who was previously charged with a series of sex crimes against young female family members. The Utah County Attorney's Office previously dropped charges without prejudice, and the man was not convicted. However, Fox 13 claimed to have records which, quote, indicate the man previously confessed to sexually assaulting at least one of the girls on an undercover phone recording. David Lee Hamblin. The disgraced therapist is a man named David Lee Hamblin. In 2012, Hamblin was accused of rape and arrested. The Utah Daily Herald reported at the time that Hamblin was being charged with 12 counts of rape of a child, 3 counts of sodomy of a child, 1 count of attempted sodomy of a child, and 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse of a child. The charges were based on events that reportedly happened between 1991 and 1998. However, despite the accusations against Hamblin, all the charges would be dismissed in 2014 after prosecutors said they had trouble obtaining the necessary documents to prosecute Hamblin. Both Hamblin and Levitt are indeed mentioned in the 151-page document Levitt shared with the Utah press. While these accounts have not been proven in court, they do provide some insight into what Hamblin and Levitt have been accused of. One document labeled Victim Statement Number 3 is one of 8 different victim statements included in a larger file from the Provo Police Department's investigation into David Hamblin. On page 49 of the document, we see the mention of David Levitt as being involved in a prostitute house with children. Quote, he, David Hamblin, David Levitt, and Joe Benyon would all jokingly call Rosie Madam to talk about her running a prostitute house, the document states. The Rosie mentioned refers to David Hamblin's then-wife, Roselle Hamblin. A chart describing experience number 50 lists David and Rosie Hamblin and David Levitt as people involved in abuse between 1993 and 1995 at a house in Provo. Under a section titled Other Occurrences, Times and Locations, it states, quote, this happened at nearly every party or when people came over to our homes. However, the frequency refers to how many times this happened with David Levitt. This also happened when we were at parties of other group members, like when we were at Gordon Bowen's house for a few different parties. Redacted often pushed us onto many people trying to get us to have sex with them. She did this at many parties and places she took us. The alleged victim goes on to describe David Hamblin and David Levitt remarking about how they were the, quote, cutest thing. The statement says, quote, David L. grabbed me around the waist and said that he would love to do that and kissed me on the forehead. Rosie walked away, and on the way out, David L. said to David H. that he was going to stop by in the next couple days. The statement goes on for another 150 pages describing 118 cases of ritualized sexual abuse. The arrests begin. In September 2022, Utah County Sheriff's Office Special Victims Unit arrested David Lee Hamblin for multiple first-degree felony sexual offenses against a child. Hamblin, now a 68-year-old man, was booked for 3 counts of sodomy of a child, 1 count of rape of a child, 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse of a child, and 1 misdemeanor count of lewdness involving a child. According to the probable cause statement, quote, a female victim came forward in April 2022 to report that she had been repeatedly sexually assaulted by David Hamblin. The sexual assaults began when she was 6 or 7 years old in the mid-1980s. The victim's family resided in the same neighborhood as David, located in Provo, Utah. The victim stated she would regularly play with David's children and had been babysat on numerous occasions by David. The victim asserted that the first sexual assault that she would recall occurred when she was playing at the Hamblin residence. The victim recounted a time when she had been sexually abused when she was in the basement of the Hamblin home. The victim described a sexual assault where she and 2 other children were forced to stand in front of David while he directed them to take turns, quote, sucking on his penis. David forced each child to take turns giving him oral sex while he critiqued and criticized their abilities. The statement describes additional incidents of abuse, including one involving another female adult. It also notes that David Hamblin had his therapist license revoked by the state of Utah due to allegations of sexually abusing his clients. However, the investigation has found that he continues to perform so-called therapy in the form of healing circles. Although Hamblin was originally ordered to be held without bail, in March 2023, he was granted a $100,000 bail and allowed out on house arrest with an ankle monitor while he awaits trial. In August 2023, Hamblin's ex-wife, Roselle Stevenson, was also arrested by the Utah County Sheriff's Office for her alleged role in the ritualized child abuse. Stevenson was arrested on 1 count of sodomy on a child relating to abuse of a girl under age 13. The alleged incident occurred in Spring City, Utah, around the year 1994. Stevenson was ordered to be held without bail. As of June 2024, David Hamblin is still under house arrest and awaiting trial to face the charges of child abuse. The role of religion. As with the accusations against David Hamblin, many incidents of child abuse involve various officials associated with religious institutions. Examples of child abuse can be found in nearly all religions. Probably the most infamous examples involve the Catholic Church. In the late 1980s and early 2000s, numerous allegations of various types of sexual abuse of children by church authorities led to investigations, trials, convictions, and apologies from church leadership. The abuse mostly affected boys, but also girls, between the ages of 11 to 14 years old, with some victims as young as 3 years old. The allegations were made against priests, nuns, cardinals, and other Catholic Church officials. The allegations often involve decades of sexual abuse committed by adults. Incidents of sexual abuse have been documented in Canada, the United States, Chile, Australia, Ireland, and parts of Europe. The crimes of the Catholic Church leadership also include covering up sex abuse allegations and moving abusive priests to other parishes where the abuse often continued. By the early 1990s, reports of abuse within the Catholic Church were becoming harder to ignore. In 1992, Irish singer and activist Sinead O'Connor tore up a photo of Pope John Paul II during a performance on Saturday Night Live. The act of protest sought to draw attention to the abuse allegations and the lack of action taken by the Church in response. Although O'Connor faced heavy criticism for her actions, 9 years later, the Pope publicly acknowledged child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. He was criticized by representatives of the victims of the sexual abuse for his slow response to the Catholic sex abuse crisis. The allegations against the Catholic Church received even more widespread attention after a 2002 investigation by the Boston Globe. The Globe Spotlight team revealed the Church's secret protection of pedophile priests and a series of articles which had international repercussions. Of course, the Catholic Church is not the only religious organization to face allegations of child abuse. Similar allegations have faced the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormon Church, and the Second Baptist Church. In 2017, Paul Pressler, a former Texas representative and state judge and an important figure in the Second Baptist Church, was accused of molesting a 14-year-old boy beginning in 1979, while Pressler was a justice on Texas's 14th Court of Appeals. The alleged abuse continued until 2004. The following year, Pressler was also accused of molesting 2 men and soliciting them for sex over a period of 14 years. The men were a former member of a church youth group and a lawyer who worked for Pressler's law firm. In February 2019, the Houston Chronicle released a 6-part investigation titled Abuse of Faith, exposing the depth and depravity of the allegations of sexual abuse involving not only Pressler, but other members of the Second Baptist Church leadership. The investigation found that more than 250 people who worked or volunteered in the Southern Baptist churches had been charged with sex crimes. Since 1998, around 380 Southern Baptist church leaders and volunteers have faced allegations of sexual misconduct. About 220 offenders have been convicted or took plea deals, and dozens of cases are still pending. These abusers left behind more than 700 victims, many of whom were shunned by their churches. Some were urged to forgive their abusers or pressured to get abortions after becoming pregnant. Paul Pressler died on June 7, 2024, never facing jail time or punishment for his abuse. In Chapter 16, we will further explore the role of religion in the pyramid of power. Solutions. As we proceed higher up the pyramid, the solutions for the problems presented become more complex. How can we put an end to the widespread abuse of children in churches, schools, families, sports, and groups like the Boy Scouts? How can we hope to create a better world if we don't protect the children and ensure they have a future free from abuse? The answers to these questions are not always easy, especially in the face of organizations and media outlets who seem intent on normalizing child abuse by attempting to rebrand pedophiles as minor attracted persons, making the argument that child abuse is simply another sexual identity that anyone can choose. We must continue to question and challenge authority, especially as it relates to the most vulnerable and susceptible population, the children. Since abuse often comes from family members or family friends, parents need to be cautious with who they leave their children with. Parents ought not assume their children are automatically safe when in the presence of authority figures like religious leaders, sports coaches, teachers, security, and police officers. This doesn't mean parents should live in a constant state of fear and paranoia, but blind trust in adults simply because of their role in your local community is also not advisable. Sexual abuse of children can also often begin on the internet. Children and young adults are not always aware of the threats of child abusers when they are scrolling social media and posting pictures to their friends. Parents can inform their children of the risks of talking with random strangers in chat rooms, video games, live streams, and social media sites. Parents can also consider parental controls on their children's devices, or consider not allowing the children on social media until they reach a certain age where they may be mature enough to understand the risks. While we cannot protect the children at all times and all places, we as parents, families, and community members can absolutely do our best to educate the children about the dark realities of our world. Finding a balance between terrifying the children with tales of stranger danger and allowing them to roam freely is not easy, but it's absolutely worth the effort. We must continue to question and challenge authority while protecting the most vulnerable among us. The children of the future are counting on us to protect them so they might have the opportunity to grow into healthy, balanced, and educated adults. To dive deeper into this topic, we recommend reading The Franklin Scandal by Nick Bryant and One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. We also recommend watching the documentaries Who Will Find What the Finders Hide and Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein. Thank you for watching.
My name is Derrick Broze. For the last decade, I've worked as an investigative journalist, hosting a radio show, writing books, and producing numerous documentaries about the realities of child trafficking, the dangers of technology, and indigenous struggles. Now, I aim to uncover whether there exists a network which ties these issues together. Many researchers posit the existence of an international cartel which covertly manipulates world events for their own benefit. Are these claims simply fantasy and paranoid delusion, or is there truly an agenda to subvert humanity to the demands of the pyramid of power?
Chapter 16: Religion and Secret Societies. In the previous chapter of this series, we outlined how the problem of child abuse pervades all cultures, political affiliations, genders, and religions. Unfortunately, pedophilia is not the only problem associated with organized religion. Organized religion, sometimes known as institutional religion, is defined as a belief system and rituals which are systematically arranged and formally established. Organized religions have an official doctrine outlining these beliefs and rituals, as well as a hierarchical or bureaucratic leadership structure, and a codification of proper and improper behavior. While humanity has been seeking to understand the physical world by creating stories and myths which explain natural phenomena since the beginning of our species, it took hundreds, and in some cases thousands of years, to develop the current major organized religions. The origins of these organized belief systems began to crop up around the year 2000 before the current era, with the seeds of Hinduism developing in northern India. Early Judaism begins in the Middle East around this time as well, while Buddhism sprouted in India around 500 BCE. We also see the beginning of Confucianism in China, the Yoga Sutras as outlined by Patanjali, and the Vedic text which contributed to both Hinduism and Buddhism. Additionally, around 140 BCE to 200 of the current era, the Hebrew Bible was developed and organized. The tales of Jesus of Nazareth also appear within 100 years of the current era. As man attempted to explain the world with belief in gods and supernatural phenomenon, these various belief systems evolved into organized religious institutions, all of which have claimed a monopoly on the path towards God, enlightenment, or a peaceful afterlife. Inevitably, these institutions clashed as they pursued dominance over competing beliefs and interpretations of the world beyond the five senses. Over the last 2,000 years, these ideologies have been used as a method of dividing the populace and justifying war, violence, and the murder of heretics and non-believers. The Jews of the pre-Christian era, sometimes known as Second Temple Judaism, were already struggling to maintain their beliefs in the face of Hellenistic rule by the Greeks. Alexander the Great conquered the land of Israel by 331 BCE, and Jews often faced mistreatment. The Jewish opposition to Hellenistic influence on their religious and cultural practices led to the Maccabean Revolt from 167 to 160 BCE. The tensions between the Jews and their conquerors continued during the Roman Empire, resulting in several Jewish-Roman wars between the years 66 and 135 CE, leading to the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple. Over time, the Jews themselves divided into numerous sects, including Pharisees, Essenes, Zealots, and early followers of Jesus of Nazareth. Battles between Jewish sects, Christians, and the Roman Empire began almost immediately after Jesus is claimed to have existed. The Roman Empire's religion was centered around the pantheon of Roman gods and goddesses, as well as various rituals, prayers, and sacrifices to the gods. The emperors of the time viewed the rise of the Christian cult as a threat to their dominance and power, and began a period of persecution of Christian missionaries and believers. The Jewish leadership came to view Christians as a threat to their beliefs, while Christians often blamed Jews for the crucifixion of Jesus. Over time, as Christianity spread throughout the world, Christians would persecute each other, often based on minor differences in interpretation of the life, teachings, and divinity of Jesus. The Roman Empire persecuted Christians beginning with the reign of Nero and continuing throughout the empire. Valerian reportedly ordered the Senate to command Christian clergy to perform sacrifices to the Roman gods or face exile. Christian leaders would also be executed or lose their titles and property if they failed to worship Roman gods. As the Christian cult evolved into a mass religious movement, the Roman Empire was forced to contend with its rising popularity. Roman Emperor Galerius issued the Edict of Toleration, which ended years of persecution of Christians and began their recognition by the empire. This acceptance would expand 2 years later with the so-called Edict of Milan by Constantine I, the first Roman ruler to convert to Christianity. This trend continued for decades to come, culminating with Christianity becoming the official state religion of the Roman Empire in the year 380 under Theodosius I. Ironically, Theodosius would immediately begin suppressing and persecuting those who practiced the polytheistic worship of the Roman gods. Theodosius continued Constantine's ban on animal sacrifices, and in the year 389, he began issuing decrees which implemented a ban on the celebration of non-Christian holidays and visits to temples for non-Christian gods. Despite the majority of the Roman Empire still practicing worship of Roman gods, the persecution of these beliefs and the promotion of Christianity as the only accepted religion of the Roman Empire continued after Theodosius' death with the reign of his sons. Those who held on to their Roman spiritual traditions or practiced other forms of indigenous spirituality were often labeled pagan. The practitioners of these varied belief systems did not call themselves pagan. The term literally means rural, rustic, civilian, or someone who comes from the countryside. Thus, pagan can be seen as a derogatory term applied by Jews, Christians, and Muslims to those who practice beliefs outside of the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The wars between religious factions would continue for the next 1500 years with the rise of Islam and the teachings of Muhammad. In the 7th century, Muslims began invading various nations in North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Europe as they sought to spread the gospel of Muhammad and Islam. The Ottoman Empire was infamous for carrying out a number of genocides against Christians, Jews, and believers of other religious traditions. Christians and other religious minorities were discriminated against and persecuted in financial matters, prevented from owning certain weapons, holding certain professions, and obligated to pay taxes. Muslim rule would expand across the Middle East, North Africa, and the Iberian Peninsula in modern-day Spain and Portugal during the Rashidun Caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate, and the Abbasid Caliphate. The fourth and final caliphate was the Ottoman Caliphate, established by the rulers of the Ottoman Empire, who claimed caliphal authority from 1517 until the Ottoman Caliphate was formally abolished in 1924. This period saw numerous battles and wars waged between the Islamic caliphates and European Christian kingdoms. These included the Crusades, where the Catholic Church sought to recover the Holy Land from Muslim rule, the Baltic Crusades against the non-Christian people surrounding the Baltic Sea, the Crusades against Christians based on the schisms within the Church from 1200 to the late 1500s, and the Reconquista, which officially ended Muslim rule of the Iberian Peninsula in 1492 with the Granada War. These religious wars continued to be waged across Europe and the Middle East during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. The death toll from these wars ranges from 7 million on the low end to more than 10 million people on the high end. The 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648 is widely considered to be one of the most violent conflicts of this period, with an estimated 4.5 to 8 million soldiers and civilians dying from the effects of battle, famine, or disease. The use of religion as a justification for war and death has continued in the 20th and 21st centuries. For example, in the late stages of the Ottoman Empire, the ruling classes implemented a program of forced migration and exile focused on the Greeks and the Aegean region. The expulsions continued throughout World War I and lasted until 1922, resulting in the deaths of an estimated 289,000 to 750,000 people. The Ottoman Empire's Greek genocide also included forced death marches through the Syrian desert, executions, and the destruction of Eastern Orthodox cultural, historical, and religious monuments. Additionally, while the violent conflict between the Palestinians and the Israeli government has waged since the very beginning of the creation of the Israeli state after World War II, the world has witnessed an increase in awareness and disgust for the violence since October 7, 2023. On that day, Hamas radicals carried out a terrorist attack on the Israeli population, resulting in the deaths of over 1,000 people, including Israeli citizens and foreign nationals. In the months following the Hamas attack, the Israeli government has carried out endless bombings on the Palestinian population, much of it being heavily documented by independent journalists using social media to broadcast the harsh reality to the modern world. Current estimates of Palestinian deaths since October 2023 range from 30,000 to over 100,000. The Abrahamic religions are not the only organized religions which are responsible for violence. Even Buddhists have participated in violence against people with differing beliefs. In Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Bangladesh, Buddhist nationalist movements have formed in recent years in response to differences between the majority Buddhist populations and the minority Muslim and Christian populations. Numerous reports during the 2010s and 2020s document how some Buddhist nationalists have become convinced they are under an existential threat from Muslims. Some extremist Buddhist monks have given up on pacifism and now attempt to justify the use of force against the ethnic minority Muslims in Myanmar. To be certain, some of the Muslim sects also promote hostility towards the Buddhists, and these conflicts have erupted into violent incidents. In Bangladesh, villagers who converted from Buddhism to Christianity nearly 2 decades ago were attacked by Buddhist extremists after they refused to reconvert to Buddhism. Their Christian church was demolished and crosses were broken in retribution for their beliefs. In all of these conflicts, from the current ongoing battles waged by religious fanatics to the wars fought thousands of years ago, religion is a central component of the misguided justification for continued violence, theft, rape, and murder. Time and time again, throughout humanity's history, we have seen wars and violence enacted in the name of defending a god or banishing those who refuse to comply with the edicts of the popular religious ideologies. Especially in the post-9/11 world, we see examples of politicians, military officials, and extremists who believe they are fighting a holy war in some misguided attempt to bring about the prophecies of the Bible.
This crusade, this war on terrorism.
We have declared jihad against the U.S.
May God protect all those who work for peace.
Верите, что в 25 году конфликт будет закончен, естественно, нашей победой?
Я в Бога верю, а Бог с нами.
You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible. Our hero troops, they have one supreme main goal: to completely defeat the murderous enemy.
Researcher Adam Green has been studying the Abrahamic religions on his podcast, No More News, for over a decade. Green says these religions are nothing more than methods of controlling and manipulating the masses.
The role of religion, or how I see religion being used, is theological, psychological control. It's the original mind control. The number one religion, two top religions in the world, Christianity and Islam, are over 4 billion believers, and both of those emerged from Torah, Messianic, apocalyptic Judaism. Half the world now worships the God of Israel, the God of the Torah, the God of Zion, through the prophesied Messiah, Moshiach, that was intended all along to have all of the nations worship in the end times, and to conquer all the pagan idol worship and have all of the world, all flesh, every knee will bow to the prophesied Messiah and the God of Israel. The role of it is used in, like, Plato's noble lie, basically what I believe the Torah and Christianity by extension were built upon. The noble lie that to control the masses, you need a founding mythology to keep everybody in line and keep them hypnotized under a Judeo paradigm of prophecies and end times and messiahs to rule the whole world.
Beyond the violence and war which has raged for millennia in the name of religion, there are also scholars who believe that the Abrahamic religions simply co-opted pre-existing spiritual traditions when it was politically expedient for the ruling class. For example, we know that the narrative of Jesus Christ has many parallels in Middle Eastern myths about gods dying and rising. The cults surrounding Baal, Osiris, and Adonis are all examples which survived through the Hellenistic and Roman periods and likely influenced early Christianity. As the Christian cult grew into a formidable movement and the Roman Empire chose to embrace Christianity, they rebranded many of the indigenous festivals and celebrations as Christian holidays.
Eventually became the Gentile world. They syncretized with a lot of the pre-existing pagan myths of a passion, of a dying and rising deity. You know, there's Dionysus, Mithra, Osiris, Romulus in Rome also. Different motifs that they incorporated and put the overlay of the Hebrew prophecies and Messianic, Davidic Messiah. They syncretized to target the pagan world so they would more easily adopt Jesus, the King of the Jews, as their God. The whole intention of the Messiah was to conquer Rome and all of the nations, and that's exactly what Jesus did. And you can find scriptures outlining this explicitly all over the Torah and even in the New Testament. Like Paul says in Romans 15:12 that Jesus will, quote, reign or rule over the Gentiles. That's the whole purpose of the Messiah. All of the nations, all of the Gentiles, all of the Goyim, every knee bowing to the God of Israel. And that's the ultimate objective of the nation of priests, who are to be the light into the nations and have all of the world worship their God. 800 years ago, one of the top sages in all of Judaism says Christianity and Islam helped prepare the world for the Messianic age by believing in the laws of Moses, the God of Israel, and a Messianic figure and Messianic prophecies.
Occult researcher Mark Passio believes one of the goals of religious leaders is to distract from fundamental truths which have been hidden from humanity, namely what he calls natural law.
That's what Luciferians ultimately know, and that is what, in my understanding, separates them and makes them distinct from Satanists and other dark occultists. religious people who have been indoctrinated into any form of religious thought, have to first understand that in and of itself is a dark occult agenda. And that's one of the most bitter and horrific pills for anybody to have to swallow. Now, that is not to say that all religions do not contain a seed of spiritual truth that they are based upon and built upon foundationally. The problem is that they diverge from that core essence of spiritual truth in almost every way over time, and they become dogmatic and rigid belief systems that people get locked into from a mental, dialectical perspective. And what that serves to do, and why the dark occultists favor getting people to mentally buy into religious belief systems, is that deflects them away from the real truth about natural law. The difference between the 7 deadly sins and the true transgressions against natural law from a purely natural perspective. The 7 deadly sins are pride, from the Christian tradition, are pride, gluttony, sloth, lust, anger, jealousy, and greed, all of which are vices, not actual behaviors that initiate harm against another sentient being directly. The true 7 deadly sins, which there are, from a natural law perspective, that are the true transgressions against natural law that bring true karmic consequence upon people who enact these immoral behaviors are, and listen qualitatively to the difference between the so-called 7 deadly sins from the Christian religious tradition to the real 7 deadly sins from a natural law perspective. Here's what they are: murder, assault, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, and deception. All direct violations of natural rights of sentient beings. All initiations of violence against other sentient beings. So this is what religion serves to do. It serves to take us off the course of what true morality is, which is not to do those immoral behaviors, and to put us on a so-called understanding of false moral principles that are watered down, that are based on vices instead of actual initiations of violence. You know, because if we understand real initiations of violence, we would understand that government does all of these things, that government is violence and coercion and ultimately slavery. And that is what religion is designed to do. Religion is designed to make people not understand that through a watered down and false variant of moral principles instead of the true ones under natural law. Religionists have to open up their worldview to understand that this knowledge contained within the body of information known as the occult, hidden knowledge, was specifically designed to take you off the path to the understanding of natural law, which is the only path that can liberate humanity, because they are the true laws of the creator of the universe. They are God's true laws, and religion is designed to give people false laws of morality, to get them to cling onto that so that they will never understand how to truly be free.
Quite clearly, organized religion has been and will continue to be a tool for manipulation and control of the masses. One final point on the conflicts which arise from religion should also be noted. Specifically, even nations which have rejected religion as the official state dogma have in turn used violence against those who choose to believe in a god or a higher power. The French Revolution and the so-called Reign of Terror in 1792 led to violence against church officials, the nationalization of church property, and the exile of tens of thousands of priests under what was known as de-Christianization. The Mexican Revolutionary period in the early 1900s also saw a program aimed at eradicating religious practices. We can also look to the many communist revolutions as examples of state atheism being used to justify the stripping of property, abuse, and murder of adherents to various religions. These communist revolutions burned churches, mosques, and temples, which the state saw as a threat to its supremacy. Conspiracy researcher David Icke has been studying the control techniques deployed by what he calls the global cult since the 1990s. He believes using religion to divide the population is one of the strongest techniques used to control mind and spirit.
And so if you are setting out to keep the public in ignorance of what you know, then religion serves your agenda perfectly, because they are prisons of the mind. And a lot of people in religions don't realize this, but you know, there are certain key areas where they're all basically saying the same. And it's in those areas, ironically, of agreement that so much truth lies, but they don't see that. And the third point I would make on religion is, if there's a few of you and you're trying to control the many, the absolute bottom line essential to that is you've got to divide and rule the many. Because if they come together in unity, it's over. Finished. So you've got to get them fighting among each other. And religions are wonderful fault lines. Even though there's so many areas of agreement, they don't realize they're wonderful fault lines to play off against each other. So now you have Trump quoting the bloody Bible, you have Netanyahu quoting the Bible, you have others quoting the Quran, all in support of their psychopathy. And that's a perfect vehicle for divide and rule and squeezing the perceptions of possibility of the population. And that's why religion's been created.
Perhaps the most vile aspect of organized religion relates to the tendency for politicians and influential public figures to proclaim their belief in the popular religion of their home country while privately living a life in complete opposition to the stated principles and values of said religion. There are literally endless examples of politicians and religious leaders being engulfed in scandals which reveal adultery, lying, theft, murder, and the aforementioned pedophilia. Clearly, these actions do not align with the proclaimed tenets of the world's popular religions. Even more disturbing is the fact that many adherents to organized religions also privately practice rituals as part of their membership in a wide range of secret societies. The secret society subversion. Secret societies have existed for millennia, going back to the Pythagorean secret societies in 530 BCE, the Eleusinian and Mithraic mysteries in ancient Greece and Rome, as well as the cult of Isis. These secret and sometimes not so secret societies rose and fell throughout the centuries, leading to groups like the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, as well as secret student societies at elite universities like Skull and Bones and Scroll and Key at Yale University. These secret societies and the mystery religion they covet were not simply the realm of religious fanatics or the average person. Kings, emperors, and politicians have all been members of these various cults and secret societies, which are sometimes referred to as fraternities. There is no doubt that these organizations have wielded an uncanny influence on geopolitical outcomes. In the final episode of this series, we will dive deep into the role secret societies like the Freemasons and not-so-secret societies like the Society of Jesus have played in the unfolding of historical events over the last few hundred years. For now, it's important to recognize that these societies included all types of people from a wide range of backgrounds, political parties, and religions. For centuries, critics have debated whether members of these secret societies have a greater allegiance to their private clubs and fellow members than they do their own religion, nation, or family.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go on.
Sure they are.
The role of secret societies is fundamental. What I call the global cult, which is behind the direction of global society, is actually a fiercely compartmentalized global network of secret societies. And if you look at whether it's the Freemasons or any of these secret groups, they're compartmentalized in levels of degree. So the lower you go, the less they know about what the people at the top know. So where these inner core elites of these secret societies meet, that becomes like the inner core of the global cult. And there's two worlds in one world. There's the world of the cult, the secret societies, and they pass on at the inner core, not Bill and Joe down the lodge, the inner core, highly advanced information compared with what they allow the public to know. And this information is, yes, of course, about where the world's being taken, but it's also about the nature of reality itself. Because if you can keep the nature of the very reality that we're experiencing from your target population, you're already in an immense position of power over their perception of what the hell's going on. So that's the one world where this information is passed over through the inner core of the secret society network.
There is perhaps no greater example of politicians and influential people living one life in the public sphere and acting out a completely different fantasy in private than the group known as the Bohemian Club. The Bohemian Club and the cremation of care. The Bohemian Club was originally founded in 1872. The club owns the infamous Bohemian Grove, a restricted 2,700-acre campground in Monte Rio, California, which every July becomes the home for hundreds of America's influential politicians and industrialists for a 2-week encampment. Some of the rich and powerful who have attended and/or given speeches include William Casey, the director of the CIA from 1981 to 1987, former U.S. Secretary of State, diplomat, and war criminal Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, a former national security advisor and promoter of the Technocratic era, Dr. Wernher von Braun, Nazi and scientist with the NASA space program, astronaut Neil Armstrong, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, and George H.W. Bush while serving as Vice President. General Dwight Eisenhower also attended before being elected to the presidency. Presidents who have attended included Herbert Hoover, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, and Gerald Ford. Ronald Reagan and Nixon met at the Grove to discuss plans for Nixon to go after the Republican nomination unchallenged. It has long been rumored that the seeds for the creation of the atomic bomb were planted at the Bohemian Grove in a September 1942 planning meeting for the Manhattan Project. Ernest Orlando Lawrence was an American nuclear physicist and a winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1939 for his invention of the cyclotron. Lawrence worked on uranium isotope separation for the Manhattan Project. According to the book, An American Genius, The Life of Ernest Orlando Lawrence, Lawrence had many trips to the Grove where he connected with the men who would eventually fund his research. Lawrence's membership in the Bohemian Club was sponsored by his university president in 1932. As a member of the club, he met William Henry Crocker, Edwin Pauley, and John Francis Nayland, the man who helped him obtain money for his energetic nuclear particle investigations. Lawrence also shared a meal with General Eisenhower and former President Hoover at the Grove. Even in the 2020s, we continue to see powerful people in American politics attending the Bohemian Grove meetings. In April 2023, ProPublica detailed Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's relationship with billionaire businessman Harlan Crow. The report notes that Thomas has attended the Bohemian Grove with Crow. The most infamous and worrisome aspect of the Bohemian Grove is a ritual known as the cremation of care. This ritual involves Grove members dressing up in red hoods, marching and chanting in front of a 30-foot hollow owl statue at the head of the Grove Lake. The club says the owl is their mascot and symbolizes wisdom. The ceremony, which has been taking place since 1888, is presented on the first night of the annual encampment and is said to give Grove members an opportunity to banish their worldly cares. This cremation of care involves incinerating an effigy of dull care in front of the owl. Starting in the 1980s, the Grove would be infiltrated by journalists and activists. In 1981, Rick Clower's Mother Jones article, Inside the Secret Life of the Power Elite, detailed the elite gathering and reported on the owl and the opening ritual. In July 1981, ABC News released a 5-minute special report about the Grove. However, the owl was only briefly shown and the cremation of care ritual mentioned in passing. In 1989, Philip Weiss wrote an article for Spy magazine detailing how he spent 7 days in the camp posing as a guest. In his article, Inside the Bohemian Grove, he writes that he saw Bohemian Grove literature which claimed Grove rituals are derived from Druidic traditions. However, it wasn't until the year 2000 that the world was able to see the cremation of care ritual with their own eyes. That year, independent journalist and provocateur Alex Jones released his documentary, Dark Secrets Inside the Bohemian Grove. Jones and his cameraman snuck into the Grove and recorded the opening ceremony. Jones would later describe the ritual as satanic. While Jones's video provided evidence of politicians participating in a secret ritual, his video was grainy and indecipherable at some points. However, in December 2023, an anonymous train-hopping YouTuber known as Dancer infiltrated the Bohemian Grove by sneaking in via a small boat overnight. He infiltrated the grove a second time in May 2024 and recorded the most clear evidence of the cremation of care ritual to date. Are these politicians and influential members of high society practicing a neo-druidic ritual designed to help them shed their concerns for the world? In Druid traditions, the owls are seen as part of an initiation. The cremation of care could be an initiation ritual for members of the ruling class who are beginning their journey into the world of secret societies and secret rituals. This is but one example of the actions of powerful people meeting in secret to enact rituals which conflict with their public persona. While I do not profess to know for certain whether God or gods exist, there is no doubt that institutional religions have been used to sway the masses to support actions which are diametrically opposed to the claimed intentions of the world's religions. For thousands of years, tyrants and psychopaths have used claims of divine right or direct communication with God to justify their plunder, lies, and war crimes. It is my belief that organized religions are themselves the biggest impediment to developing an individual connection with the divine, the world beyond the five senses, and a respect for all of creation. Whatever your spiritual beliefs, whether you attend a church, synagogue, mosque, or temple, do not allow pastors, priests, gurus, imams, and rabbis to stand in the way of your direct connection with the divine.
If you are in control of your own mind, if you're in control of your own uniqueness and your own unique perception, what you do is you say, I'm gonna take what feels right, and I'm going to leave what I think is nonsense. I'm not going to take it to be the Word of God. I'm going to take it to be a series of philosophies, some of which are obviously nonsensical and very violent and psychopathic, and others that have validity. I mean, there's some great lines in the Bible. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's a wonderful line. There's many great lines in it. But because it's the Word of God and God can't be wrong, you then have to take all the crap. And it's a wonderful example of the difference between groupthink, belief, and unique individual perception making its own choices about what it believes. And this, of course, the unique perception, is the worst nightmare of the cult, because if you look at any tyranny, whatever form it takes, and they're all basically the same, they all want uniformity. They want uniformity of belief, they want uniformity of structure, even uniformity. Look at the Soviet Union, uniformity of buildings. To this groupthink, whether it's religion, whether it's a party political belief, whatever it is, a cultural belief, this groupthink in which you must think the same as everyone else or you're not one of us, that is crucial to collective uniformity of belief and control instead of individual uniqueness.
Do not allow those who claim to have a monopoly on a relationship with God to mislead you or twist Scripture to support actions which you know are immoral and ungodly. We must guard against the forces of evil which attempt to justify their horrific actions while they hide their true intentions and beliefs. We must question everything, including religion and secret societies. In the 16 episodes of this series, we have described the design of the Pyramid of Power and outlined the many institutions and individual players which allow this pyramid to function. In the final episode of this series, we will further explore the role of secret societies and the belief systems which guide these organizations as we finally answer the question, who or what does this Pyramid of Power serve? To dive further into the rabbit hole of religion and secret societies, I recommend the following books: Celsus in His Own Words, a translation of the True Teaching, and Secret Societies by Michael Howard.